The wind howled a mournful dirge across the frozen expanse, a cruel symphony that clawed at the thin fabric of her coat. Alara huddled deeper into the inadequate shelter of the rock overhang, knees pulled tight to her chest, trying to conserve the last vestiges of warmth. 2 days. It had been 2 days since the wagon broke, 2 days since Papa succumbed to the cough that had rattled his chest for weeks, leaving her utterly alone on this unforgiving mountain pass. The small bundle of supplies was dwindling, the biting cold a constant, gnawing enemy threatening to claim her as it had him. Fear, sharp and suffocating, was a physical weight in her chest. She was just 18, adrift in a world that had suddenly become vast, indifferent, and terrifyingly empty. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat. Every gust of wind sounded like approaching footsteps. Her stomach ached with hunger, a dull, persistent throb. She looked at her chapped, raw hands, shaking slightly. Papa had taught her to shoot, to track, to survive, but he hadn't taught her how to bear this solitude, this crushing weight of being the last one standing. A sound, distinct from the wind, pierced her awareness. A stone scraping. Her heart leaped, a frantic bird trapped in her ribs. She froze, straining her ears. Heavy, deliberate footsteps crunching on the frozen ground. Not an animal. Someone. Hope warred with a primal dread. On these desolate trails, strangers were rarely saviors. She clutched the old, worn rifle Papa had carried, its cold metal a small, familiar comfort. Peeking cautiously around the rock, she saw a figure emerge from the swirling snow tall, cloaked in dark, rough fabric, moving with an unnerving silence for such a large man. His face was obscured by a wide-brimmed hat pulled low. He carried a pack and a long rifle. He didn't look towards her hiding spot, seemingly focused on navigating the treacherous terrain, yet there was an air of coiled awareness about him. He stopped some distance away, surveying the landscape, his stillness profound. Alara remained hidden, barely daring to breathe, her gaze fixed on him. Was he a trapper, prospector, or something worse? The stories she'd heard of men who preyed on the vulnerable in the wilderness flashed through her mind. Her muscles tensed, ready to bolt or fight, though she knew how futile resistance would be against such a presence in her weakened state. The cold bit deeper, a constant reminder of her peril, pushing her to the edge of desperation. Could this stranger be a lifeline, or just another wolf in the wilderness? The silence stretched, thick with unspoken danger and her own overwhelming vulnerability. He spent a long time simply watching the trail ahead, a statue carved from the harsh landscape. Alara's limbs were growing numb, the cold seeping into her bones. Eventually, he turned slightly, and she thought, just for a fleeting second, that his gaze might have flicked towards her hiding place. She flinched back instantly. He didn't move closer. Instead, he lowered his pack carefully to the ground. From it, he extracted a small axe and began methodically clearing a small patch near a stand of pines, breaking off dead branches. He worked with quiet efficiency, not wasted motion. He wasn't building a fire yet, just preparing. Alara watched, a strange mix of fear and curiosity holding her captive. He seemed purposeful, not like a bandit looking for easy prey who would likely have approached aggressively by now. He seemed like a man simply enduring, like her. As dusk began to paint the sky in bruised purples and grays, he finally knelt and struck a match, coaxing a small fire to life from the kindling he'd gathered. The flickering orange light was a beacon in the gloom, promising warmth. He sat by it, back straight, rifle resting beside him. He took out some jerky and hardtack, eating slowly. Alara's stomach cramped. The smell of the fire, faint on the wind, was almost unbearable. She hadn't eaten properly in days. The conflict raged within her. Stay hidden and risk freezing, or reveal herself to this silent stranger and risk. What? He hadn't shown hostility. He hadn't even acknowledged her presence, if he knew of it. The cold was winning the argument. Shivering uncontrollably, she finally pushed herself to her feet, wincing as stiff joints protested. She stepped out from under the rock, rifle still clutched in her hand, and walked slowly, deliberately, towards the firelight. Her boots crunched loudly on the frozen earth, shattering the silence. The man's head snapped up. His hand went instantly to his rifle. He rose slowly, his face now visible in the firelight. Hard-featured, weathered, eyes the color of storm clouds under a heavy brow. They held no obvious malice but were watchful, assessing. He said nothing, just waited. Alara stopped a safe distance away, her breath misting in the frigid air. "Please," she managed, her voice thin and shaky. I am alone. My father. He passed." The wagon words failed her. She just stood there, a picture of desperation and vulnerability. He looked at her for a long moment, his gaze steady, taking in her tattered clothes, the rifle she held more for comfort than threat, the raw fear in her eyes. He didn't lower his weapon, but the tension in his posture seemed to ease, just a fraction. He looked back at the fire, then back at her. Finally, he spoke. His voice was low, gravelly. Cold, it wasn't a question. It was a simple statement of the obvious. Alara nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. He gestured with his hand towards the fire, a slow, deliberate movement. It was an invitation, hesitant but clear. Alara hesitated for another heartbeat, scanning his face, his posture. There was no trap she could discern, only a weary acceptance. Lowering her rifle slightly, though not putting it down, she walked towards the fire, sinking gratefully onto the frozen ground near the edge of the warmth. The heat on her numb hands and face was almost painful at first, then a wave of pure relief. He watched her the entire time, his eyes never leaving her. He didn't offer food immediately. He simply sat back down, resuming his quiet watch, allowing her to warm herself. The silence returned, but it was different now, no longer solely filled with the threat of the unknown, but with a fragile, unspoken truce. He didn't speak again that night, nor did she. He offered her a piece of jerky and a drink from his canteen without a word, simply pushing them towards her across the firelight. She ate the tough meat gratefully, chewing slowly, feeling strength begin to trickle back into her exhausted body. He never slept deeply, Alara noticed, always alert, eyes scanning the darkness beyond the firelight. She drifted into a restless sleep, the cold still a presence, but held at bay by the fire and the quiet presence of the stranger. In the morning, he was already up, tending the fire. He had cooked a small portion of beans. He divided them precisely in half on 2 tin plates. He pushed one towards her. "Eat," was all he said. His name, she learned later, was Silas. He didn't ask hers. He didn't ask about her past. He simply accepted her presence with a stoic, unreadable calm. They traveled together for days. Silas moved with an economy of motion, conserving energy, his knowledge of the wilderness profound. He knew where to find shelter, how to read the changing weather, how to track game, though they ate sparingly. Alara followed his lead, learning his rhythms. He spoke rarely, and when he did, it was usually about practical matters, the trail ahead, the need for water, the direction of the wind. He seemed entirely self-sufficient, a lone wolf of the mountains. Alara, finding her voice tentatively, began to ask questions. Where was he headed? South. Why? He didn't answer. She learned not to press. He didn't pry into her story either, though her aloneness and lack of destination must have been obvious. Yet, in his actions, there was a quiet protection. He always took the more exposed side of the trail. He kept watch while she slept. He shared their meager food equally. It wasn't kindness in a soft, gentle form, but a hard, practical code of the trail, a recognition of shared vulnerability against a brutal world. Alara, watching him, felt the rigid knot of fear around her heart begin to loosen. He wasn't the monster her fear had conjured. He was simply Silas, a man living a hard life. She started to contribute, helping with tasks, proving her capabilities. She could shoot accurately, knew about edible plants, understood the signs of the weather. He noticed a flicker of acknowledgement in his storm-colored eyes. The silence between them became less awkward, more companionable. It was filled with the sounds of their journey, the crunch of boots, the rustle of leaves, the cry of a distant hawk. She found herself observing him, the lines of hardship etched around his eyes, the quiet strength in his hands as he worked. He was a mystery but not a threat. Their trust was built not on words, but on shared miles, shared dangers, and the silent promise of looking out for one another. The vulnerability she had shown that first night had not been met with exploitation, but with a silent, steady acceptance that was, in its own way, more profound than any outward show of sympathy. She felt herself changing, hardening in some ways, but also finding a quiet strength she hadn't known she possessed. The girl who had huddled terrified under a rock was slowly becoming a woman who could walk beside this capable, silent man, facing the wilderness with a growing sense of resilience. One evening, they camped near a narrow canyon. The wind was picking up, carrying the scent of snow. As they prepared their meager meal, the sound of approaching horses reached them, too many for honest travelers. Silas's head snapped up, his expression instantly guarded. He extinguished the fire swiftly, the small light vanishing as if it had never been. "Hide," he ordered, his voice low and urgent, pushing her towards a small crevice in the canyon wall. He melted into the shadows near their campsite, rifle ready. Alara scrambled into the narrow space, heart pounding against her ribs. From her hiding spot, she could hear the riders drawing closer, their voices rough and loud. They were clearly not friendly. "See tracks here," one shouted. "Fresh. Ain't far." They were being hunted. Silas remained utterly still, a part of the darkness. The riders dismounted, their boots crunching on the frozen ground. "Spread out. They're close." Their voices were hard, cruel. Alara held her breath, pressing herself against the cold rock. She could hear them searching, getting closer. Then, a sound, a rustle, a snapped twig, and a shout. "There! By the rocks!" The confrontation exploded. Gunfire echoed through the canyon. Alara squeezed her eyes shut for a second, fear overriding everything. But then her training kicked in. Papa's lessons. She might be hidden, but she wasn't helpless. She peered out, her eyes scanning the scene. Silas was moving with incredible speed and agility, using the terrain to his advantage, returning fire, the sounds of the struggle sharp and brutal. He was outnumbered. Seeing him fight for their lives, a fierce protectiveness surged through Alara, eclipsing her fear. This man, who had silently offered her a chance when she had none, was in danger. She saw one of the men trying to flank Silas, creeping towards a position that would leave him exposed. Without conscious thought, Alara raised her rifle, aiming carefully, remembering Papa's instruction. Breathe, sight, squeeze. The shot cracked, sharp and clear. The man stumbled, crying out, clutching his arm. It wasn't a kill shot, but it drew attention, disrupted their attack. Silas used the distraction, moving to better cover. Another rider fired towards her hiding place, the bullet whining off the rock face near her head. But she had bought Silas precious time. He took down another attacker with a swift, precise shot. The remaining men, unnerved by the unexpected resistance and the unseen shooter, hesitated. Silas's voice cut through the night, cold and dangerous. "Get out." Now the threat in his tone was clear. The remaining attackers, seeing their advantage lost and facing an opponent far more capable than they'd anticipated, particularly with Alara adding to the defense, retreated, scrambling back to their horses and riding off into the night, their curses fading into the wind. Silence fell again, heavy and complete. Alara remained in her crevice, trembling, but not from cold. Silas emerged from the shadows, moving cautiously, checking their surroundings. He came to her hiding place. He didn't say thank you, he didn't need to. He simply looked at her, his gaze holding a depth she hadn't seen before, a quiet acknowledgement. "Good shot," he said finally, his voice low. Alara nodded, her hand still gripping the rifle. "You saved me," she replied, her voice steadier than she expected. He didn't deny it. He simply looked at the direction the attackers had fled. "We move," he stated. The danger was gone for now, but it underscored the perilous nature of their journey and the vital need for their partnership. In the face of external threat, Their unspoken bond had solidified into a powerful, necessary alliance. Alara felt the last remnants of the terrified, helpless girl fall away, replaced by a steely resolve. They traveled on, the shared ordeal of the attack forging a deeper, more explicit understanding between them. Silas no longer simply tolerated her presence. He relied on her, just as she relied on him. He spoke a little more now, not of his past, but of the trail of survival, treating her not as a burden, but as a capable partner. Alara learned to anticipate his needs, to read his subtle cues. The landscape remained harsh, the journey arduous, but facing it together made it bearable. The fear was still there, a low hum beneath the surface, but it was now tempered by a quiet confidence born of their shared resilience. She had faced her deepest fears, loneliness, helplessness, death, and found strength in the most unexpected place, beside a silent stranger in the wilderness. One clear morning, standing on a ridge overlooking a vast valley, Silas stopped. "South," he said, gesturing towards the distant horizon. "My destination is that way." He paused, turning to her, his eyes searching hers. It was the longest, most direct look he had ever given her. "Where do you go, Alara?" He had finally used her name. The sound of it on his lips was unexpectedly resonant. Alara looked back the way they had come, then at the path ahead, then at Silas. The past held only loss and solitude. The future, alone, seemed bleak and uncertain. But beside him, facing the unknown, there was a sense of possibility, of earned connection. The adventure had been the journey itself, a crucible of hardship and survival. The love wasn't a sudden, passionate flame, but the quiet, sturdy warmth of trust and partnership forged in the fire of shared adversity. It was the look in his eyes, the simple act of sharing food and water, the unwavering protection in the face of danger. "I go south," she said, her voice clear and steady, meeting his gaze without wavering. "With you," a faint, almost imperceptible shift occurred in Silas's expression, something that might have been relief, or perhaps a quiet acceptance of a future he hadn't anticipated. He simply nodded, a single, definitive movement. He turned back towards the south, towards the next ridge, the next challenge. Alara fell into step beside him, the rifle now slung comfortably over her shoulder, not clutched in fear. The vast, indifferent world stretched before them, but they faced it together, two solitary figures who had found an unbreakable bond in the heart of the wilderness. The journey wasn't over, the dangers still loomed, but Alara was no longer afraid of facing them. She had found her strength, her purpose, and a quiet, enduring partnership that felt more like home than any place she had ever known. The orphaned girl had found her path, not in a destination, but in the shared steps taken alongside another resilient soul, walking south into whatever the future held, together.